Welcome in. I'm G from the Nine Root Biters, and this is our first ever Spirit Island co-op spirit guide with none other than Wounded Waters Bleeding. I've been wanting to make this spirit guide since the beginning of the channel. If you watch the Nature Incarnate video, you know how much I love this spirit. I could talk about this spirit for hours. I have talked about this spirit for hours with Ethan. Before we begin, I'd like to preface by saying that this video is not a guide on how to play Wounded Waters at the highest difficulty. Me and Ethan don't usually play with level 6 adversaries, so we're kind of focused more on just general good habits when playing the spirit. We want to make these high complexity spirits more accessible to more of the Spirit Island community. So we won't be talking about optimized openers or which cards are good and whatnot, just more of like a sort of macro sense, an overview of playing Wounded in a co-op setting. For the sake of clarity and brevity, I've divided this video into 4 chapters: lore and premise, spirit mechanics, cooperative play, and skill ceiling. So, why are we starting with the lore? Well, the premise of Spirit Island is so distinct and creative that a lot of the coolness factor comes from the spirits themselves. That's the main appeal for most folks. So, reading the general overview of what the spirit does can give, at a first glance, not just an insight into how they behave, but also how they play. Also, I'm just a lore nerd. I love learning obscure facts about characters in my favorite games, so here we go. In years past, Peace Waters was a woodland pond, fed by a small river, a spirit of contented coexistence and the gift of water. Humans and animals would drink in peace, then move on. The invaders, too, found Peace Waters, drank, and moved on, upriver, where they built slaughterhouses and tanneries, pouring charnel blood through the pool day after day, year after year. Now the spirit which used to be Peace Waters has barely survived. It is no longer a spirit of peace, but it has not yet found coherence in a new nature, and until it does, it is at risk of unraveling altogether. So, few things right away. We are playing a spirit that has been abused and is likely going to have some kind of weak early game. But there's a hint of something that is going to be very important for this guide and understanding how this character works, and I'm going to call it alignment. It has not yet found coherence in a new nature. You can align yourself to become as violent as the invaders. But remember, you were once Peace Waters. You could come back and play as a peaceful spirit, but empowered. It's just a matter of getting out of that state where you're unraveling. So right off the bat, we know what to expect, that, okay, we have to build up to our strength. And with that, we'll segue into mechanics so we can see how that is done in the game. At first glance, the spirit card looks pretty standard, except for this thing at the top right, claimed healing markers. Healing markers are essentially a representation of where your alignment is currently at. I like to, again, I'm using alignment because I play D&D, so, good, evil, lawful, chaotic, it just works. The alignment corresponds to benevolent and malevolent, and those are represented by the water and animal elements. So you can see that we can assign these healing markers either water or animal. And the effect of these healing markers is that we get healing cards based on which one we have more of. So, for example, on turn 3, if you have more water than animal, then you get the water healing card. If you have more animal than water, then you get the animal healing card. To gain a healing marker, you just need to see which element you have more of when you're playing your cards. So before the fast power phase, you take a look, I have more water, I claim a water healing marker. What's nice is that you can break ties, and your presence track, in fact your very first presence track, gives you an element of your choice between water and animal. So it's actually not that difficult to play around these healing markers. The game gives you enough tools to do so. Then you can claim a healing card if you meet its requirements, which, as I mentioned before, there's one option at turn 3 and then one option at turn 5. Both of these healing cards are major power spikes, so once you reach turn 5, that's when your spirit has fully recovered from what they were going through in the early game. And what they were going through in the early game, I'll get into that right now. You destroy a presence or forget a power card each turn. So that is essentially what the risk of unraveling is. Wounded Waters kind of has this Blighted Island effect right off the gate. And the only way they can overcome it is through these healing markers. So, we have a general idea now of how this whole alignment system works. It's just get more of these elements, survive the early game, pop off. Done. I'd like to go over the other stuff on the card, the growth options, the presence tracks, and the innate powers. As you can see by the growth options, we can really only do this one, gain power card and add a presence every turn. This is only open to us when we get a healing card, and we don't want to reclaim if we can help it. So for the most part, you're just going to be doing this option, but this option's alright. Gaining a power lets you get more options for your alignment, and adding a presence helps you progress your track. Like I said, you get your healing card on turn 3, so until turn 3, your opening is always going to kind of look the same. You're just going to go boom, boom, boom. Water End was already great for kind of skewing your alignment. Gathering one Blight into one of your lands is also great in the early game because if you start off, or I shouldn't say if, you do start off on a blighted land. So if the invaders are building their turn 1 and they're going to ravage it, you can relocate that blight out of there so that it doesn't cascade. It's also really useful for meeting targeting restrictions, which the Spirit does have with the starting cards. Once you hit this presence track, the game opens up for you considerably, because again, you just got your turn 3 healing card, and now you can branch off towards either going top track or bottom track, and I'll go over the nuances of each track later, but jumping from 1 energy to 2 card plays into 3 energy, 3 card plays is already amazing for any spirit, because it lets you get more of your innates off more consistently, which these innates, Swirl and Spill and Sanguinary Taint, these innates are really cool as they always have impact on the game, and it's pretty difficult to not proc at least one of these on your turn. If you're not getting any water or animal, then something is wrong. So Swirl and Spill, you can see, is water-based and has a lot more of the pushing effects. It gives Wounded Waters more control, whereas Sanguinary Taint also has some control, but mostly it's fear and damage. It's that violent nature that we talked about that they could embody. The healing cards seem simple, but they synergize with your kit so well that getting them really does impact the game. Let's look at the water ones first. At turn 3, you're able to downgrade invaders when they come into your lands. And you also get to downgrade invaders if a Dahan comes into your land with invaders. You can only do this max once per power though, so be careful of watching out for that. And also make sure it's in your land. I've done this mistake many times where I did it in a land that wasn't mine, so just be careful of that. Rolling Waters is more violent, but it's also more free. When you add or move beasts into a land, you may do 1 damage there per added or moved beast. Notice that there's no restriction on the land or the number of beasts. You can do this for as many beasts as you added or moved. You can do it with Dahan too, but there is a restriction on Dahan because Dahan manipulation cards are easier to come by. But overall, this card lets you kind of play more as like an army commander. In turn 5, you get these healing cards that replace your innate powers with something more powerful. Water's Renew replaces Sanguinary Taint, and Water's Taste of Ruin replaces Swirl and Spill. You may notice something interesting about these cards though. Even if you go Water's Renew, you still have the power to add beasts. And even if you go Water's Taste of Ruin, you still have the power to push things around. This is because all this time I've been talking about Wounded Waters as if they had 2 alignments. In actuality, he has 4. You can go Roiling Waters into Waters Renew, or vice versa, Serene Waters into Waters Taste of Ruin. You can try to stay harmonious, but then decide, no, violence is the only option. Or you can try to be violent and be like, no, this isn't right. I want to go back to this. It's so cool, and it makes each game have a story of your character's alignment shift due to the invaders. The decision that you make at the beginning of the game with these alignment cards is going to be the most important decision you make throughout the entire game. Because on low to mid difficulties, all alignments are viable. Let me say that again. Any combination, regardless of who you're up against or who you're playing with, all of them are viable if you want to play that alignment and you have the will to play around those mechanics. You could play Wounded Waters the same way every game and still have a blast and still have impact on the game state. And it's all because of the way that the spirit is designed. Once they hit turn 5, they just kind of become a hyper carry. And with that, we'll segue into how the spirit works in cooperative play. So you may have noticed, but there's 2 other spirits that I'm currently playing with. River and Sharp Fangs. I picked these guys for this example because I think they best embody what Wounded Waters is trying to be. I mean, his art just looks like a combination of the two, but done really beautifully. I love the art for Wounded Waters. I said earlier that no matter what alignment you pick to play, it'll work with any spirit against any adversary at the lower difficulties. But if you pick the right alignment with the right spirit combination, it'll be even more powerful. If you go the water alignment with River Surges, you're going to be pushing things left and right and center, and the invaders are not going to be able to get anything done, and they're slowly just going to disintegrate. If you play Wounded Waters with Sharp Fangs, you guys are going to be moving beasts everywhere on the island and just sniping explorers and towns left and right. Water-adjacent spirits, it's the same exact story. If you play with Shroud, if you play with Ocean, if you play with Spread of Rampant Green, you're going to have a good time just pushing things around. For beasts, if you play with Many Minds Move as one, if you play with Thunder Speaker, if you play with Hearth Vigil, you'll be able to mobilize everyone on the island really, really well. Then there's the neutral spirits, like Bodan, Finder, Earthquakes, Serpent. These games are actually the most fun because you can play off of them and what they're feeling like. It's a very vibes-based spirit, and as you can tell by this vibes-based guide, I enjoy that. Now for this last section, skill ceiling, it's kind of more a discussion of spirit mechanics and cooperative play in tandem, but on a very niche level. I'm getting into the very detailed things that I've picked up on as I've played this spirit. You may have noticed I didn't talk at all about my starting cards, and there was a reason for that. I don't think there's a single opener that you can do with these spirit cards. I think all these spirit cards have their time and place depending on things like initial explore, board placement. Depending on which alignment you're going for, you could opt into a different turn 1 each time. Most of the spirits in this game, they have turn 1 is moving things around or setting up pieces, and then turn 2 is my ravage prevention or sniping an explorer on fast or something. But this spirit's cards really feel like they were some latent, last-ditch cards that were conjured up because of the trials that Wounded Waters had to go through. And as such, they have 2 purposes. 1, they give you the elements you need, and 2, once you have the elements you need to get the alignment that you want, they scale really well into those healing cards. In a vacuum, these cards don't look like they do a lot. Adding 1 beast and 1 disease, I'm pretty sure there's another minor power that does something similar. Boon of Corrupted Blood, 1 damage, and then that spirit destroys their presence. That's kind of bad. Draw to the Water's Edge, the 2 towns have to be from the same land. This seems like the only good card, like 2 Fear and push 1 Explorer in a town, but it's on slow, and you have to do it from Blight. But no, combine these with the healing cards, and you'll see what I mean by these scale really well into the mid to late game. Boon of Corrupted Blood, if you're going with the Roiling Waters, it does 1 damage, and then that spirit destroys their presence, yeah, but they do another damage, and then they gather a beast, which, because this is your power, it moved a beast with your power. It does an extra damage there. This card just kills a city on fast. Draw to the Water's Edge. You can pull towns into your land and then just downgrade them. And then if you play this card, you're pretty much guaranteed to be able to move Dahan as well with Soil and Spill. So, unless you replaced it, but no, even then, Sanguinary Taint has a push Dahan as well. Yeah, you can just downgrade those 2 towns immediately after drawing them in. And who knows, maybe you're playing against an adversary like Habsburg, where they like to keep all their towns in one place. So by pulling them out, they aren't able to do the things that they want to do. Bloodwater and Bloodlust, Beast and a Disease is generally good, and remember, that Beast does 1 damage. And then yeah, 2 Fear, push an Explorer in a town, and these things, this just gives a lot of control. 2 of these cards give you Water and Beast, but to balance that, they made it so that it has to be from a land with Blight. But remember, you can gather a Blight into your lands after turn 2. So if you need to meet that restriction, you can. Just like what I say about Thunderspeaker, there's a potentially infinite number of ways that you can maneuver things around the board to make these effects stack with one another. So yeah, that's my whole bit on starting cards. I have a few more tips that I'd like to go over. Regarding healing markers and picking your alignment at the beginning, if you look at the game and you're like, okay, there is absolutely no way that I'm not going water, then you can just go water straight. You can go boom, 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 boom. But I don't advise this. You see, this spirit has the luxury of flexibility. So what I always recommend is, instead of just full sending it to the alignment that you want, at least on turn 2 or turn 3, have 1 card that gives you the elements you need to do the other alignment. Because here's what happens now. You are now able to go the other healing card if you so desire. Yeah, you could send it for water, but then realize, oh wait, I went water with Shroud of Silent Mist so I could push stuff around, but actually Shroud of Silent Mist wants me to do damage so that they can soak fear from the invaders that are damaged. Okay, I'm gonna go animal here now and help her with that better. You see, these little decisions of, like, you have your plan and then the game changes over time. You have events too, right? Events, anything could happen. So just go the other healing marker on turn 2 or turn 3 so you have the option open if you need to pivot. Now for presence tracks, I'd like to note that the first 3 are always the same. But the one that you go next isn't necessarily always the same either. One thing that I like to do in Spirit Island, this isn't just Wounded Waters, this is across all spirits. I like to go for major powers. I enjoy the major powers. I like to gamble on a good major power. After having gone gain power card a bunch of times, I would go this to gain the energy to be able to play a potential major power, and then just forgetting one of the minor powers that I have. Now, if you're like Ethan, and you like to play a minor power game most of the time, then I recommend going bottom track first. And when you do go bottom track, do this healing card option so then you're covered on that energy front. Alternatively, if you do want to go major powers but you don't need a power card, like you decided you were greedy and you decided to get a major power on turn 3, then you can go this on turn 4 in order to have the energy to play that major power. And just don't sleep on this. Adding a Destroyed Presence back as a growth option is really good, because you're going to have Destroyed Presence as Wounded. Like, one turn you'll have 4 Destroyed Presence, and all of a sudden you're just all back on the board and you're everywhere, and people are like, what? How did you do that? This thing adds up, and if you get the cards that you need, then the energy to play them is the most important thing. I do like Fire and Plant here because it lets you proc the other effects of your innates, both of these get procced with the Plant and Fire, and then same thing with your healing cards. But the thing is that some of the special effects on your innates, I very rarely try to go for these because I haven't really found that they contribute that much. Like, yeah, in one land pushed into downgrade all towns and cities, but you had to have had those towns and cities in that land anyway. And then adding a disease for 5 animal is kind of whatever as well. They pitched Wounded Waters as a spirit that could play around disease, but really, this is it. And this. But yeah, that's it. They don't do anything special with disease. They just have 2 options to put it down. On the topic of Destroyed Presence, I think that unless there's a very specific case where your card draw is just not it, you're not able to get any cards with water or animal or a useful effect, I think every turn, while you're seeking a path towards healing, you should be destroying your own presence. Remember that you start off the game with 2 sacred sites that you don't need. You have no cards that require sacred sites. The sacred sites, those were a relic of the past when you were Peace Waters, but now you're Wounded Waters. You don't need these sacred sites. For the first 2 turns, at least, you can remove your sacred sites and focus instead on spreading out across the map to be able to use your powers. It's also great if, let's say that, I don't know, they initial explored in the mountains and they're about to build a city and that city is going to ravage. Turn 2, no problem. Instead of taking out this sacred site, you can just gather this blight into here with your growth option and destroy this presence, because it was going to die anyway, right? You can destroy that presence, and then turn 3 you can destroy this presence, and oh, look at that, you already have your healing card, and now the destroyed presence doesn't really matter because you are now able to bring it back with this growth option. So yeah, just general rule of thumb, I like to just destroy presence over forgetting the card. You only have to deal with this for 4 turns. So you only need to destroy 4 presence. And again, out of those 4 presences, 2 of them are already guaranteed for you to destroy. So just destroy them. The last tip I'd like to give is regarding the turn 5 healing cards. So even though they look like complementing versions of each other, they're very different in the way that they are used. Both of them have a powerful effect that can go off if you can manage to get that sun and those extra beasts or animals. The thing is, though, with Waters Renew, this sun effect is kind of meh. Like, yeah, you can replace an entire invader, a whole city, with a Dahan if you have the 2 Dahan present, if you're able to gather up to those 2 Dahan. But if you have those Dahan in there anyway, given the lack of influence that you have in the early game, it's going to be difficult to save the Dahan necessary in order to be able to use this effect. If you can get it off, that is great, but it is not necessary. Whereas with Water's Taste of Ruin, it is very necessary that you get this effect. The other effects are meh, because they build up to this. If you don't get this with Water's Taste of Ruin, then it is a little bit underwhelming. Like, the bare minimum for this is, most of the times, Afflict with Bloodthirst is just going to gather beasts, and then push those beasts and maybe generate fear. That's it. Waters Renew, the primary effects are pretty much just this. Defend 3 or downgrade an invader. Which, by the way, this is my opinion, take it or leave it. I think that Defend 3 is better than downgrading the invader. My reasoning is, when you gather the Dahan, you're already going to be downgrading something. And now those Dahan, if it's going to ravage, need protection. Downgrading a city into a town isn't that Dahan's still gonna die. If you defend 3 though, then those Dahan will live to that at the very least and have the chance to fight back. And this add a beast option right here, I love this. I said that all of the alignment options are viable. I said that you could go any combination and it would work. My personal favorite though, the one that I like to go in most games, is Roiling Waters Renew. Because Waters Renew, just being able to add that beast and also moving the Dahan to synergize with this, fantastic. It's great. Serene Waters Taste of Ruin is still good though. You just need a bit more to make it work. but I don't think you really need that much, because if you're able to proc the effects on this innate, then chances are you're also able to get the effects off from Sanguinary Taint, which will increase the effectiveness of this. You just kind of need these cards that move things, move Dahan, in order for this to work the way that you want it to. But yeah, everyone has a preference. The only real correct decisions is what you think is the best for your team. And with that, I'd like to close out the guide. Thank you all for watching. I hope you learned something about Wounded Waters. If you did, please be sure to like and subscribe. Comment down what other things you could think of, what cool combinations of spirits you can do with Wounded Waters Bleeding. I'd love to hear about it. And who knows, maybe we'll play those combos in a future video. I had a lot of fun making this guide, and as I'm recording this, Ethan is also working on his Starlight guide, so be sure to stick around for that. Until then, we are the Gnawing Root Biters, and look forward to seeing you next week.